your laundry list of
Fair enough.
exhibits.
Fair enough. And then I'll square away with court reporters what you still need to be in the process.
Excellent.
Okay.
So if you could state your name, please.
My name's Jeremy Owens.
Okay. Mr. Owens, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. All right, Mr. Owens, you are employed by TJ Boyle, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what's your title with TJ Boyle?
I am a landscape architect.
Okay, and have you been called upon as a consultant on the Cambridge project and the Westman project?
As an aesthetic consultant, yes.
Okay, as they're commonly referred to, Cambridge GLC Solar LLC and Westman GLC Solar LLC?
Yes, sir.
And did you prepare an aesthetics report for each of those projects?
I did.
Okay. And was the date of that on or about the 16th of April 2015?
I believe so.
Okay. And do you recall what those exhibits were designated in the original filing that went into PSB?
I called them aesthetic analysis reports, and then there were a few attachments to each one.
Okay. And do you recall what the exhibit labeling was for purposes of the submittal?
I don't recall what the exact.
If I told you they were West 4 and Camb 4, would that?
I'd have to trust you.
Okay. Fair enough. Did you also submit an affidavit with those reports?
Yes, I did.
Okay. On or about the 29th of June 2015, do you recall submitting supplementary testimony in that, or supplementary report?
I recall submitting a landscape plan.
Okay. Did you also submit a one-page supplementary report that was marked West 4A and Camb 4A? I showed you those. Do you look familiar?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Okay. And were those submitted in response to comments that were received?
I believe so, yes.
Do you recall the substance of the testimony or the substance of those reports that you provided?
I believe it was about whether or not the two projects would have a cumulative impact, or in my case, talking about how they would not have a cumulative impact to aesthetics.
Okay. And you submitted those reports as part of the application process for a certificate of public good for the two projects that we're here to talk about today?
The original
The original reports?
Yep.
And the supplementary report?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Have you had the opportunity to review those reports recently?
Not recently, no, so I wouldn't recall exactly what's in them, but I feel confident that what was submitted was correct and represents my opinion.
Okay. And has there been any change in circumstances, or have you had any reason? Would you have had any reason to change your opinion or the conclusions that you reached in those reports?
No, sir.
Okay. That's all I have for direct testimony for Mr. Owens.
Okay. And I'm assuming you're going to want to move all those exhibits into.
So the exhibits we'd like to move into evidence at this point are, as part of the original application, West 4 with its attachments, which is an aesthetic report from TJ Boyle, authored by Jeremy Owens. Camb, CAMB-4 with attachments, which is an aesthetics report by TJ Boyle, written by Jeremy Owens, dated on or about April 16, 2015. The affidavit of Jeremy Owens that accompanied West 4, the affidavit of Jeremy Owens that accompanied Cambridge 4. On 6/29/2015, the supplemental testimony drafted by Jeremy Owens of TJ Boyle, designated West-4A. 6/29/2015 supplemental testimony drafted by Jeremy Owens of TJ Boyle, designated Cambridge CAMB-4A. Landscaping plan, which was submitted by Jeremy Owens of TJ Boyle on or about June 29, 2015, designated Camb-4B. And then the response letter of the petitioners, which was drafted by me, dated June 29, 2015, for both Westman and Cambridge GLC Solar.
marked.
We'll have to mark that sequentially in whatever order we're talking about.
um,
So is the petition marked letters or numbers?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood what you just said is the,
Well, when you're, in a regular court, the defendant would be letters and the plaintiff would be numbers. So do we have any particular numbering convention for exhibits?
Can I followed the proposed exhibit list until we got to a letter that was authored by you, which I didn't think was an exhibit, which I don't understand why we would need to admit that into evidence. This was legal argument by counsel on issues.
Yep, fair enough. We could, that was a cover letter that brought those, and if you have an objection to admitting that, I don't think it's appropriate to admit. It's not testimony by a witness, so.
yeah, I'm in agreement.
But those were the cover letters that were responses to comments made by the
Understood.
department.
Understood. Ms. Martin, let me just throw a flag and highlight this for you. The petitioners have put into evidence the aesthetic reviews that we've all been looking at, also some pictures that we've all been looking at. However, if you'll recall, on the 29th of June, the reply comments themselves, there was the letter, and then I think it had one or two attachments that were reports. What the petitioners have moved into evidence are the reports, but the actual letter itself, written by Mr. Carpenter on behalf of his clients, that's not going to come in, so that will not be part of the evidentiary record.
So it's just the exhibits, these two letters. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I
No,
didn't mean to
please,
interrupt.
please, that's fine.
The two letters that I wrote that had a bunch of responses to comments in here, which I think those are not evidence.
Those are not evidence.
They're not evidence. So,
Okay. So the only evidence is actually this.
right, are those reports
Right.
that Jeremy Owens drafted,
The okay.
Yes.
Okay.
plus the landscaping plan,
Right.
which had Cambridge 4B on it, which
Mhm.
was referencing to Mr. Worper's property.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So those are the only ones so far.
Okay,
Okay.
that makes sense to you?
Okay.
Excellent.
So,
Are you-
can you just say the
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, they are admitted into evidence, those exhibits that we just read.
And I think I asked you this, but I'll ask you again, Jeremy. Do these reports accurately reflect your testimony with regard to the aesthetic impacts of the Cambridge project and the Westwood project?
Yes, they do.
And you have had no reason to change those opinions or conclusions since you submitted those?
No, I haven't.
Okay. I want to make sure I asked that question. And do you adopt those formally conclusions and the reports as your testimony in this proceeding?
I do. The one caveat there is that the report for Westman has attachments that have maps that are supposed to show viewpoint locations. There's another appendix to the report that has photographs. The maps are supposed to show the viewpoint locations. Those inadvertently were left off. So the maps don't look like they relate to the photographs. I believe that the report says that they will relate to the photographs. So that's for the Cambridge project. In this case, the photograph locations on the maps in the, I'm sorry, that's for the Westman project. For the Cambridge project, the viewpoints that are shown on those maps actually also relate to the viewpoints shown in the Westman project. So it's a little confusing, but basically the gist is that if you need to see photograph locations for either one of the projects, refer to the maps for the Cambridge project, and it will show you the viewpoint locations.
Okay. And that map is, if I am following it correctly, that would be map number 1, aerial context map in Exhibit Cambridge 4.
That's correct.
And
I'll let Mr. Owens answer that question.
so map number 1 in Exhibit Cambridge 4, as well as map number 2 and map number 3 have the viewpoint locations for both projects.
Okay.
That's what I have for direct testimony for Mr. Owens,
Okay.
adopting those reports as he drafted them.
Okay.
I do have rebuttal testimony for him after Mr. Kane and Ms. Martin testify.
Okay.
So I'd like to be able to recall him for rebuttal after I hear what their testimony is and after I have the opportunity to cross-examine them.
Okay.
Is there any objection?
I'll have to-
No, I wasn't asking you, sorry.
Not yet.
Okay.
The other witness I'd like to call briefly is Mr. Schellenberger, who's, we have two exhibits that were submitted on the 29th by Mr. Schellenberger, which simply relate to the, well, actually, you know what, I don't even have to do him, because the aesthetics impact criteria were in yours with regard to the regional plans. So, never mind, I don't need Mr. Schellenberger. Yes.
The combined plan, CAMB 8,
Yeah.
is that, I don't think that was on your list, and who's the sponsor for that?
The sponsor for that was Krebs and Lansing.
Right.
We're not referring to that in this, with regard to the aesthetics and patents.
Oh, okay.
That was Miss Martin.
Pardon?
That was Miss Martin had submitted a,
No, we had submitted a Krebs and Lansing, which is the engineering firm, had submitted a map that showed the two locations
okay. Okay, my fault.
and the distances that they were located from one another.
Okay.
And again, had I realized that, and again, this is my error, had I realized that we needed to put that map back into evidence again, I would have had somebody from Krebs and Lansing show up. Jeannie, if excuse me, I can get somebody from Krebs and Lansing on the phone to testify that they did that map.
I just thought that would help the parties on the board understand the cumulative impacts question, and so I thought it would be a helpful exhibit because it shows useful information with that one of the board's 4 questions in mind, that's all.
If you have no objection to stipulating that one into evidence, then I don't need to introduce it through anybody.
No objection from me, I think it's useful information for the board.
Okay, and I'm gonna have to, well, let me check with Ms. Martin. First of all, if someone could just jog my memory about which exhibit this is.
I think this is it, right? This is
Yeah,
CAMB 8. I
And
have
is
some
that-
notes on it.
That's Cambridge 8, and that stands alone.
That stands on.
Was submitted June 29th.
Then I have it, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's the one sitting right in front of me. Okay,
Before I get that into evidence, Your Honor, I'd just like to have the conversation.
Yeah, you know, Your Honor, I'm gonna withdraw the request to admit that one. I don't think we need it. If you recall, there was are we on the record or off the record? We're on the record. If Your Honor will recall, there were 2 questions that came up initially with regard to this project, and the biggest one was whether or not they constituted a single facility. That map was generated for the sole purpose of showing that the 2 facilities were not a single facility and didn't have any bearing on the aesthetics analysis that we've been asked to do today.
Okay.
So we don't see that there's actually any useful purpose to putting that into evidence. Has the board had an opportunity to take us have a site visit?
no, the board has not, I have seen the site.
You have?
Yes.
Okay. So you've seen the site, and then you know where they're located in proximity to one another and what the distances are. Excuse me, that's all in the procedural order that was issued by the board with regard to the separation of these 2 facilities, and I don't see any reason to put it in. So we're not gonna try to get that one into evidence.
Okay,
So
that's fine with me. Make sure I know where I am. So we have, where are we to make the witness available for cross-examination, I believe?
Yes, Jeremy can be ready for cross-examination.
Okay. The department, you'd like Ms. Martin to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, in your testimony, regarding the Cambridge GLC Solar Aesthetics Review, you said that the project is gonna be on approximately on 4 acres, and it's gonna be 10 feet high. You also, go into the analysis of the Kichi analysis, and you say our analysis, however, does not end with the results of the
I'm
Kichi.
sorry. You have to speak up a little bit.
Okay.
You say what?
Our analysis, however, does not end with, is that a little, can you hear me better this way?
Can you push the button and the green light should come on? The red.
Yeah, the power button on, but not the power strip on.
There we go.
There you go.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah, so
Okay.
just pull it up closer. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. Okay. On page 2 of your aesthetics review, you state that our analysis does not end with the results of the Kichi test. Instead, our assessment of whether a particular project would have an undue adverse effect on the aesthetics and scenic or natural beauty is significantly informed by overall society benefits of the project. Then you refer to docket number 6860. Do you remember?
I believe what you're referring to is actually a reference to actual language from a public service board decision.
Okay, because I pulled up that docket, and when I looked at it, the results of that were that the project that you were referring to is in an industrial size area. So this makes sense doing a project like this, because it doesn't really affect the aesthetics of the area as much as the actual project that's being proposed.
Okay, Your Honor, I understand that Ms. Martin is a pro se witness. I'm gonna have to, as much as I don't want to object, at some point I have to. You can't testify when you're cross-examining a witness, so you've got to ask him a question at some point.
Okay.
I'll let you rule on my objection, Your Honor,
Your
but
objection is sustained. Ms. Martin, I guess the trick is, for lack of a better word, is as long as you're asking questions, stick to questioning as opposed to reflecting on your questions. You're in safe territory.
Okay, gotcha. In the analysis that you did for the Kichi test, in your view, you quote of this document, docket 6860, do you feel that this is reflective of the current area that we're discussing today, when you refer to that?
I don't think that that's why that was placed in this, that project and its location have no bearing on why that quotation was put into the report. If you go back and read what you just read earlier about the idea that there's societal benefits that come from a project also being part of the Kichi analysis. And so the Kichi analysis isn't the only factor that goes into the Public Service Board decision. You're pointing out that there are other factors, in this case, public good. And so that's what we're quoting for. It has nothing to do with that project or anything about where it was placed.
I understand what you're, as far as public good, but what I'm trying to determine is the aesthetics of the project itself. Do you feel that the aesthetics of the project are unduly and do not represent the area and will have harmful effects on the area as far as being aesthetically pleasing?
Are you asking if I consider the project effects to be unduly adverse?
Yes.
I believe I've already stated in the report that I do not feel that either of these projects would be considered unduly adverse.
even though the projects that that is currently being proposed can be seen very well from the road?
Just because you can see a project when you're on the road next to a project doesn't mean necessarily that it would automatically be unduly adverse.
But as far as it working into the landscape with the magnitude and the size of the project, isn't that objectionable as far as being not aesthetically pleasing?
I think I would disagree with that statement.
Well, what is the term, can you define the term aesthetically pleasing?
Well, it certainly is subjective, so trying to define something so subjective I think would be difficult, and probably would take me weeks to get up to an answer that probably not everybody would agree on. So it's difficult to specifically define what is aesthetically pleasing. Does that answer your question?
Not really, because if you're writing a report and you're saying that aesthetically it's not bad, how can you define that if there's no definition for aesthetics itself?
Well, I think you asked me about aesthetically pleasing, not aesthetics itself. I think what you're saying is if do I think that the project is unduly adverse from an aesthetic standpoint? And I think I've already answered that. No, I don't.
Basically, what are you basing that on? Just the visual images that were provided within your testimony?
On my site visit, on the plans, the project was based on. The photographs that I supplied are just snapshots from my actual site visit. So the site visit itself, plus the plans and understanding roughly what the project's going to look like based on my experience with similar projects, and reviewing the extent of visibility while in the field. Yes, you will be able to see this project when you're immediately next to it. That's not necessarily what the aesthetic report is about. The aesthetic report is about reviewing the visibility from the area as a whole. You're not going to be able to see that project, the Cambridge project in particular, from a lot of locations around there. Just because you can see the project while you're next to it does not necessarily mean that it's unduly adverse from an aesthetic perspective from the entire area. That project is very well hidden on almost all sides, and the side that you can see it on, which is from Westman Road, has a lot of vegetation along the road.
From what road?
Westman Road.
Okay.
There's a lot of existing vegetation along the road, which, although you can see through that vegetation, acts as an existing screen. So when you look at everything as a whole, the conclusion that we come up with is that, yes, there's certain locations where you will see this project. The project's not going to be in your face. It's going to be set back approximately 250 feet. In the landscape, it's going to be low. It's going to be backgrounded by existing forest. You're going to be able to see the valley beyond, just as you can in the existing conditions. And there's a transmission line, I believe, that's currently in the field. So energy as a use is actually already in the view. When it's taken in context with the surrounding visibility from other areas within the study area, determined that it wasn't going to be unduly adverse, mostly because you're not going to be able to see that project.
In regards to that, looking at the road and your images, and I'm referring to Cam, I guess it's viewpoint 4 on your page 11 of 76 pages, viewpoint 5, viewpoint 6.
Sorry, which report are we referring to, Westman or Cambridge?
Cambridge. Viewpoint 7, viewpoint 8.
Can you
Hold on
slow down?
a second. Yeah, I just need to catch up here on.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm caught up.
That's okay. They're all taken in mid, when were the dates that all these images were taken?
The
Were they
exact-
taken on the same day?
Yes, these were all taken on the same day. I can't tell you exactly what day it was taken on, without going back to my records, but.
Can you give me like the general month
Well,
or?
you can see the snow's
year?
on the ground, so I imagine that it's either midwinter or late winter, potentially early spring,
Of
2015.
2015,
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
In writing up the aesthetics, as far as the proposal that you did for the landscaping, you basically did a proposal for a wetland, correct? For a moist area?
Are you asking me if I did a landscape plan where the plants were proposed in a moist area?
Right, correct.
I did.
Okay, and what did you base that on? The topography of the landscape, the drainage? You never saw obviously the land during, in the spring. Did you return to the land at all?
Objection, Your Honor, just let's try one question at a
Okay,
time.
sorry.
Sorry, Your Honor, you should. We understand.
So, are you saying, what am I basing how wet the site is?
Correct.
Where am I getting that information? I believe that was from the plan that was put together by Krebs and Lansing, which included wetlands for the area.
For the wetlands for the
And I
area.
don't know if they were the ones who mapped those wetlands, or if they were just including them from another consultant, but I was basing that on information prepared by another firm. As well as conversations with the landowner, who I believe is some sort of a wetland scientist, who also described quite clearly in words I didn't exactly understand how wet the site was.
That's what I'm referring to in my questioning, is I am very familiar with that area.
Objection. She's testifying.
Okay.
Sustained, if you could stick to just asking questions, please.
In the springtime, then you have no knowledge of how wet that area would be then?
All I
In
can do
general
is go
terms.
off of the plans that were prepared by another consultant who is the expert in that field. Whether or not the site was as wet or wetter is not necessarily something that I would understand, because that's not my specialty.
Okay. My question then is, if you don't know how wet the soil can be, how can you then develop the landscape plan?
So I'm insinuating that there's some assumptions that I have to make, that the wetlands, people who surveyed the wetlands know what they're doing, and that the site is somewhat wet, and also the landscaping plan that we were proposing was really being done in connection with the landowner and the landowner's desires, and I believe that landowner knew how wet the site was as well, and the plants that we were proposing aren't necessarily located in the wetlands, but around the wetlands. So it has a potential to get wet, but I don't believe that the plants that we were planting are necessarily proposed just for a wetland purpose.
Cool. Okay. Also, in your testimony, I don't know if it was David or not, it did come back that it would take over close to 14 to 24 years for those trees to grow, to blend into that surrounding area, correct? Especially the white spruce?
In terms of the size that they would be planted at and how long it would take for them to reach the heights that you were, I think, referring to, which was somewhere around 20 to 35 feet, I can't remember exactly. Basically, I was putting down the approximate growth rate of that particular tree. The other plants are not trees and would likely never reach that height. We never made a comment on how they would have to wait that long before they blended in. I believe that the comment was that they would blend in pretty much immediately, because they're plants and they're being planted near other plants.
Because, so when you basically designed this, it was using the information that was supplied to you by the adjoining landowner?
No, by using information supplied by Krebs and Lansing, the engineers for the project, civil engineers, so they prepared a plan, a base plan that had topographic information as well as the layout of the array field. Also, whoever was used for identifying wetlands, I believe it was Arrowhead, although I'm not sure, Arrowhead Environmental, they identify the wetlands, they're the expert who does that. All I do is take the plan that's given to me, and in this case, reviewed that plan with the landowner, talked about what the future uses were that the landowner was interested in. Had nothing to do with visibility from the public roadway, it was more about visibility from that landowner's parcel. Like I said, that landowner happened to be either, I don't even know the scientific term, but basically studies water and all sorts of things about hydrologic flows that I didn't understand. He knew how wet the site was. We tried to plant around the wetlands as they were identified in conjunction with the desires of that landowner and what any screening would look like.
The reason why I asked that is are you aware that the great dogwood is not currently grown in that area?
Objection,
According
Your Honor.
to,
That's assuming facts not evidence.
Sustain that.
sustained?
Yeah, that means you need to move on to another.
Okay. Would there have been any other plants if you were doing, besides working with the landowner, would there have been any other plants that you would have had recommended rather than those 3 plants?
Objection, Your Honor. It's asked for a hypothetical. It's nothing to do with what's actually in the ground there.
I don't like this one, I want to see, I'd like to hear the answer.
I'm a little confused as to what the question is asking. Can you restate it or state it again, please?
Okay. In regards to the plants, what would you, without Mr. adjacent landowner suggesting certain species, what would you have done and recommended for that area in regards to planting rather than
If
what we recommend?
I did not have conversations with the landowner, I probably wouldn't have recommended any plants because typically people aren't over in that area. There's no development over there. There's no houses. You'd have to walk back there, and if you were there, I don't know that you necessarily would need to have screening from the project. It's not a destination. There's no hiking trails or anything like that over there. So without the landowner's request, I don't see why I would plant anything over there.
Then you're unaware that the landowner did put the property was up for sale at that time?
Objection, Your Honor. This is totally irrelevant. I don't have any idea what this has to do with the aesthetics analysis relating to either project.
Well, to sustain that objection, we're focused on aesthetics, so let's
Okay.
keep the questions to the aesthetics criteria.
Okay. The property, in the sale of the property,
Objection, Your Honor. We have no proof except her stating that it's even for sale. There's no evidence in the record. Mr. Wilbur has withdrawn his appearance. He's no longer a party to the proceeding. I'm not even sure why we're headed down this discussion about the Cambridge landscaping plan at all. Your Honor, you continue
can
to
I object to his objection? The reason why I'm asking this is that the property was sold and the property is to be developed.
Mike, it doesn't change the substance of my objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection. The sale of the property is, aside from this line of questioning, is not in the record. And so I'm going to ask you to stick with what's in the record, with what we have before us for the aesthetics criteria.
Okay. would you recommend doing, the property line that you did down the center that separated, the adjacent landowner? Would you also have recommended, to fill in the empty vegetation that's along the roadside to buffer some of the aesthetics that you can truly see the field?
Can you clarify your first question about property lines again, please?
The proposal of the planting was done strictly along the property line rather than on the roadside. Would you also consider doing the same type of vegetation along the roadside to buffer some of the adverse effect that will happen?
We didn't consider additional landscape mitigation along the roadside, and the two concerns there. One is that the land falls away. We'd have to plant taller species there in order to really mitigate any visibility of the project. Not only does the land fall away immediately next to the road, likely all the way down to where the edge of the right-of-way is, such that the closest you could plant plants would still be at the bottom of probably an 8-foot drop, depending on where you are along the property. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But then the project itself is much further downhill in relation to the road itself. Additionally, there's the existing stem count sort of along the road. There's some moderately mature vegetation along the road. There are some gaps, but because of that existing vegetation, as well as the difference in elevation, we decided that the project itself is sufficiently out of view, doesn't interfere with any existing views. And by interfere, I mean it doesn't cover any of them up. It's not an area where you get extensive views. If it was meant to have extensive views, very likely there would be no trees planted right along the roadway. It would have been an area either that was cleared or otherwise prepped for views by the town. The road itself is not considered scenic by the town or the region, so it doesn't have any sort of special scenic importance that's clearly identified. And for that reason, we haven't prepared any additional landscape plantings for along the road.
When you were referring to Westman, are you referring to all of Westman is not scenic, or are you referring to just that particular lot where the Cambridge solar panels are being put up?
I didn't say that the road itself was not scenic. I said it wasn't identified as scenic in the town plan or the regional plan. So are you asking me if I personally feel that it's scenic, or if it's or some other question?
I'm referring to, you made a statement saying that Westman was not scenic. To me, it's a scenic road. It's very well known.
Objection, Your Honor. Just testifying again, there's no evidence in the record that it's scenic. There's no recognition, there's nothing in the record that suggests that it's famous.
Okay, let me sustain the objection, but I would like to clarify, because I think there might be a kind of ships passing in the night. The difference between being identified as a scenic area is a particular label that is given to certain areas in certain town plans, as opposed to something simply being scenic and beautiful to look at. And I believe, if I understood the testimony correctly, it was that it has not been labeled a scenic area, or a scenic resource as a town plan might.
Westman Road.
Yes, Westman.
Right.
Okay, I don't know if that helps to clarify it or not, but.
Okay. Are you aware that the town is working currently on developing a more concise more concise view of what is scenic and determining within the town what's scenic?
We object again, Your Honor. There's no evidence in the record except for her suggesting that there's nobody here testifying from the town. We have the town plan in the record, we have the regional plan in the record. Those are the only two regional or town documents required to look at. He's looked at them, he's referred to them in his reports for Westman and Cambridge. We object to Ms. Martin trying to inject other documents into this. Those documents are hearsay, and they shouldn't be referred to. They're not admissible nor are they relevant.
I'm going to sustain.
Okay. Well, can you give me 1 second, please?
Take your time, Ms. Mayor.
Okay. I will shift gears and go into, I'll be asking you questions regarding the Westman GLC solar project now. In that report,
Your Honor, before she continues, I'm going to object. Her initial request for intervention was with regard to the Cambridge project only, and I'm going to object to her proceeding down the line of involving herself in the Westman project as well. She did not submit a request for intervention in the Westman docket, only the Cambridge docket.
My recollection of the board's order was that she was granted intervention in both dockets. Is your recollection different from that, or?
I don't know that that was addressed by the board's decision, Your Honor, to be perfectly frank.
I have the decision with me, and it was.
I can hold the decision up as
I
well.
have it here, Your Honor, too, so if we need to, we actually might have more than one copy of it.
It does say on June 17th, Ms. Martin filed a motion to intervene in the review of both proceedings. And goes on to say Ms. Martin commented on the project's, plural, potential negative aesthetic effects on the region. In the absence of any objections, the board finds that Ms. Martin has set forth a substantial interest that may be affected by the outcome of these proceedings that is sufficient for permissive intervention under Rule 2.209B. Consistent with Rule 2.209C, Ms. Martin's participation is restricted to only the issue in which she has demonstrated an interest, which in this instance is the aesthetic criterion of 30 DSA Section 248B5.
What page is that on, Jim?
Page 4 of the board's 11/10/2015 order.
Thank you. That was my recollection, and given that the board has given Ms. Martin intervention and party status, I'm in a position to counter the board's decision, and so I'm going to allow Ms. Martin to continue down that line of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you. In regards to preparing the aesthetic plan, no mitigation was done for this. Is that correct?
The aesthetic analysis you're referring to?
Yes.
No landscape mitigation was prepared for this, that's correct.
Is there a reason why that was not done?
So very similarly for the this project as the Cambridge project, it's not very easy to see directly into this site. Yes, it's slightly visible from locations around, but that, especially Pleasant Valley, Upper Pleasant Valley Road, if you're looking directly at the project, you can and will in the future, if it was built, be able to discern it through existing roadside screening. That being said, that's about as much as you get in terms of visibility unless you're right on Westman Road, in which case you still have some existing vegetation that limits visibility, some of which is substantial and similar to Cambridge, some of which thins out so that you very briefly, if you're on Westman Road, will be able to see the project. Because of the existing screening on the site and the way that the project has been located there as opposed to, say, on the field on the opposite side of the road, which would be much more open and visible. This Westman project has been proposed in an area that does have existing screening. It's not going to be visible from a large area. Again, Westman Road is not considered scenic in this town plan. Because of that existing screening, and because of the lack of any specific scenic protections, we did not propose landscape planting along Westman Road.
Are you familiar with Yankee Magazine?
Objection, Your Honor. This is one of those documents that she's tried to pull in that's total hearsay and has nothing to do with any of the aesthetic criteria we're dealing with regard to these two projects.
Sustain.
You're to sustain. There are publications that...
Objection, Your Honor. Same thing.
In... You can give me a second.
Take
Thank
your
you.
time, sir. We're not in a rush.
On West 4, on page 16, you have viewpoint 13, which is actually Upper Pleasant Valley Road, looking southeast.
I'm sorry, you said 13?
Yes, viewpoint 13, West 4, page 16. The site is very visible from the road in that section, correct?
You're looking at viewpoint 13 at the bottom of what I see as page 4. It's the...
There's two sets of numbering, just to be clear. There's numbering at the top, the 16 of 75.
16 or 75.
And then there's a number at the bottom, which I believe is 4, because I think a number of exhibits came together. So
Right.
You're looking for either 16 and 75 or page 4.
Okay, so the question was, do I consider the project to be highly visible?
Correct.
I do not. The project is going to be mostly behind an existing sort of series of buildings. And then even beyond that, there's going to be some evergreen trees that are behind that series of buildings. And behind there is going to be the field that the project is proposed in. The arrow that's shown at the bottom of the words approximate project location may be construed to mean a field that's even further in the distance, but really we're trying to point to an existing field that's sort of tucked down behind these buildings. And I'm pretty confident of where that project is, and it's going to be very screened from this location. You might have some limited visibility from this location, but it is not going to be major by any means.
Well, the viewpoint, as you're traveling down the road, it also continues on viewpoint 14, which is on page 17. And you can see that you can still see it as you're getting closer to the Westman Road, correct?
You can see the field beyond the vegetation in the background because there's snow on the ground. From here, it looks like the arrow is pointing pretty close to the field. It's just slightly above the field, but the field itself is behind all that vegetation that you see at the bottom of that arrow. So there's the road that you can see kind of curving just below the arrow. The project would be behind the vegetation that's behind that road. So I would not consider that to be major visibility either.
Your Honor, can we go off the record for a moment? Any objections to going off the record for a minute?
No.
No.
I'm not sure who in the gallery this is, whether they're videotaping.
Members of the public are permitted to videotape board proceedings.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
Do we require them to identify themselves?
No, we don't.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you. Back on the record, please.
Okay, back on the record. How far down from viewpoint 13 to viewpoint 14 would you estimate is the road? What's the distance?
I can estimate that, but that's not necessarily going to be accurate. I could scale it off of a different drawing if you're looking for an accurate number. I'm just looking for a guesstimation or...
A guesstimation would be fine.
Without
Your Honor,
having...
I'm going to object to asking the witness to guess at anything.
I'm going to sustain that. The witness has told you that he can't give you a good guess, so unless you'd like him to try and scale it, why don't we move on?
Okay. How long would you quantify that you'd be on the road where that would be visible from October through basically April to the bidding, the budding comes out of the trees, that site would be clearly visible from that long stretch of road?
I can go ahead and answer not long at all, because it's not going to be clearly visible from that stretch of road. As I just identified, it's going to be behind existing vegetation that's along Westman Road and fairly well screened from this portion of upper Pleasant Valley Road.
When you say that the project is not visible because of vegetation, I see very little vegetation at that point. I see just an empty field, basically behind, especially where your arrow is, which will be where the panels will be going.
Objection, Your Honor, that's not a question. She's testifying.
Where the arrow is,
Which viewpoint?
and viewpoint 13, do you feel that you can see the field, that field?
No, as I stated earlier, the arrow is meant to point that the field is down below and behind these objects. If I was to literally draw the arrow directly through the project, it would look like I've got the arrow on top of the building, which would be unclear, I think. In this case, you're saying that you can clearly see the field that the arrow is on, but that, as I've said before, is not the exact field that the project is proposed, but that the project rather is down below that arrowhead in the field behind the building and behind the evergreens.
In the, on viewpoint 14, exactly where would the solar panels be?
So as I
Directly below that arrow, up slightly above the arrow, the point, it would be the top of the height of the panels?
No, as it says on above the arrow, to the approximate location of the project. But as I mentioned earlier, the existing Westman Road that you can see just below the arrow has vegetation on the far side of the road, and the field that is on the other side of that vegetation, which you can see because it has snow on it. And it's somewhat difficult to see all that snow because of all the intervening vegetation, but there is the shape of the field there below that arrow, not directly underneath that arrow, but if you follow the arrow down just a tad, that's the field where the project is proposed behind that existing vegetation that's along Westman Road.
So what, are you stating that this is an approximation?
The arrow that's there is approximately locating the project. It doesn't have anything to do with the size of the panels. It's just helping to orient which direction the project is in when you're looking in this photo.
So then how do I know exactly how high the depth, the height of the panels will be then?
You wouldn't use this photo to determine that. This photo is to help orient you towards the project from this location.
So in other words, it's just a simulation then?
No, it's not a simulation. Simulation would be something that we would prepare to accurately illustrate what the project would look like. This just points you towards where the project is to give you an idea of where it's going to be located in this particular view from Upper Pleasant Valley Road.
Can I ask you why you did not do a simulation to project what the project would actually look like?
We only prepare photographic simulations in locations where it typically is deemed necessary, either by the Public Service Board or public service or sometimes the client, because it's an expensive process and it's not really exactly what people would consider to be a reasonable cost, especially to do from many locations. To accurately represent what the project is going to look like can be expensive. So we don't always do it. In this case, because of the existing vegetation that's along Westman Road and the inability to get a clear view of this project from this location, we didn't think that performing a simulation, creating a photographic simulation of what this project would look like was reasonable or necessary at all.
You have proposed that you thought it was not necessary to do a mitigation plan as far as planning goes, and then also, you are also proposing that it's not necessary to also not do that in order to show what it actually will look like? I don't.
That's asked and answered, Your Honor. He's answered that question too.